Hey there, welcome back. I'm Dan Haggerty. This is the part of the news where we discuss in depth what you want to talk about. So email me at dan@wral.com. I want to read an email I got from Mike. Mike said, I have a problem with the term gun violence. It's the person, not the gun. But the media folk often appear to have an agenda, as do the politicians, so gun violence fits your needs. He goes on to ask, does WRAL have a firearms subject matter expert on staff? He also asked, what do you know about background checks and gun shows? Mike's email was much longer than that. He also asked about competitive shooting and some of the local teams and competitions, but I only have time to focus on a few things. So let's start with the first point. It's something I hear a lot. A lot of people wrote me about it. Thomas also said a similar thing. He said, Dan, guns in themselves do not commit violence. They are passive objects. Gun violence is a deflection from the real issue. The real issue is people violence, and they are right. People kill people. And this sounds like a really powerful argument until you break it down a bit. First of all, we say, as the media, we say gun violence in part because it describes a specific type of violence. When we do a story about cyberbullying, we're not demonizing computers, we're being precise. Then again, that's not really the crux of the argument, is it? People like Mike and Thomas think that people are the problem and guns are not. As Thomas said, gun violence is a deflection from the real issue. The real issue is people violence. Guys, it's both and more. Let's say someone is overweight and unhealthy and they smoke cigarettes and eat a dozen donuts every morning and drink beer every night and never work out. Then I tell them, hey, we have to talk about this cigarette habit. It's killing you. And they say, that's not the real problem. The real problem is donuts. Why isn't anyone talking about donuts? In debate, that's a type of logical fallacy. They call it a red herring. Look at this, not this. Meanwhile, you should be looking at both. Back to Mike's email. What do you know about background checks in gun shows? Let me start with the background checks, because this is one that actually has bipartisan support in a lot of places. In North Carolina, if you go to a gun store, which will be run by a licensed dealer, you have to get a background check, no matter what you're buying, a handgun, a shotgun, an AR-15, all of it. But at gun shows or on the internet, things change a bit. There are two types of people selling guns there, licensed sellers and unlicensed or private sellers, and they play by different rules. At gun shows, a licensed seller still has to do everything the same way, just like they were selling out of their store, including background checks for all the guns. For unlicensed sellers, North Carolina is actually a bit progressive here. They still have to do background checks on handguns. Not every state does that. But with long guns, unlicensed sellers can sell shotguns, deer rifles, and assault-style rifles without a background check, right there on the spot. Now, this is the part where people go, see, that doesn't make sense. Two people with booths right next to each other, both selling assault rifles, and they play by different rules. They don't follow the same laws. And yeah, I get it. It's a gaping loophole. But let me explain something to you. I grew up in a hunting house, a gun house. When I turned 13, my dad gave me a gun, a Winchester 30-30, a lever action rifle, just like the Old West. I loved it. Then a few years later, I wanted something new, and we liked that style of gun. So my dad talked to one of his hunting buddies and made a trade for a .35 Remington. I think the transaction happened in our driveway. This is a big part of hunting culture that dates way, way back. Groups of hunting buddies trade and sell each other guns all the time. Same goes for people at shooting ranges. Early gun laws understood that. But many experts, including one I interviewed from Duke last week, believe that those laws didn't really foresee the current market.
My kind of gut says in 1938, when the federal government first enacted some of these regulations, in 1968, when it strengthened it, there wasn't the same kind of flourishing market of people who were casual sellers of firearms. So when Congress said in 1968 that if you're in the business of selling firearms, you got to get a license, it was referring to people who were in the business of selling firearms and didn't think that there was a whole bunch of people who are not in the business, but still selling firearms regularly at events like gun shows.
That was Jake Charles. He's the executive director of Duke's Center for Firearms Law. And Mike, back to your email where you asked if we have a gun expert on staff. No, we don't. Instead, we interview experts. That way, we don't have to pay them, but don't tell that to Jake. This week, North Carolina Senator Tom Tillis took up this very same issue. He's working on bipartisan legislation in Washington right now, and recently said, right now we have people who are practically dealers, but they're kind of viewed as hobbyists or various other categories. He then discussed a mass shooting from Odessa, Texas, saying the person who bought the gun could not pass a background check. He went to a hobbyist who had a side business buying parts and making assault weapons in a knockoff space. And they're doing it at a level that is clearly not as a hobbyist. It's sort of a business. So we may see a change in the law. Congress is mulling over several tweaks right now and hearing heart-wrenching testimony from survivors in Uvalde and Buffalo just today. But still, I know a lot of you will agree with this email I got from Norman, who wrote me and said, criminals don't obey laws. Making new laws to restrict law-abiding people, that's not the answer. And again, he's right. But this argument is another one of those logical fallacies I was talking about. They call this one the circular argument. Criminals break the law, therefore laws don't work because criminals break them. I did some research on that too. If you're interested, we can look more closely at what has proven to work in the past and what hasn't. Again, email me at dan@WRAL.com. But I don't want to discredit Norman's point entirely. In fact, a local story proved it today. These guns, well, not these ones, we'll show you here in a moment. There were guns that were sold illegally in New York City by this man in Rocky Mount. Something that is so common that a trip from here to there is actually nicknamed the Iron Pipeline. Here's WRAL's Keenan Willard.
I'm Keenan Willard in Rocky Mount, where a man is accused of using this bus station to illegally traffic thousands of dollars worth of guns into New York City. 24-year-old Tyreek Colon is charged with illegally selling 36 guns to undercover officers in Manhattan for more than $40,000. Police say Colon recruited people in Rocky Mount to buy the guns for him, then drove or took the bus up to New York City, carrying bags full of weapons with him. Investigators say when he was arrested in May, Colon had 5 semi-automatic pistols and an AR-15 on him. He's now facing more than 40 counts of illegally selling weapons in New York. Colon was already facing charges of armed robbery nearby in Wilson County, where he was supposed to appear in court today. Keenan Willard, WRAL News, Rocky Mount.
Now, remember, this is all a discussion. If you know something that you're curious about, if you have an opinion that you think the news might be ignoring, please let me know. Email me at dan@WRAL.com.